Welcome back to part 2 of teamwork. And here we're talking about communication behaviors to observe. And our next slide we're going to talk about ways that communication can go awry. So I'm not going to touch on every single one of the bullet items here, but I'm just going to provide some of my experience from some of the bullets. So one of the things you want to look at as you're participating in your team meetings, and notice the text box down here below, you want to observe your own feelings, thoughts, etc., as well as others too, because you want to be sure that you're participating as fully as a team member and contributing as much as you can. So who is participating? Is there one person that's dominating the conversation, that is coming forward with all the ideas, that is 100% directing the agenda? And if that is you, then don't do that anymore. Make sure that you share the table with others that are there, that everyone's ideas that are heard. And if you aren't the one that is doing it, but that you notice someone is, then a polite way to kind of segue would be say, well, great, thanks, Karen. We appreciate all your input. Now let's hear from Jody. And Jody, what do you have to say on this topic? And so that's a lead into bullet number 2, is who is not participating. And yes, it is the person's responsibility to participate with the team, but it's the team member's responsibility to keep the whole team engaged, to be sure that that no one person dominates. And so that's one of the things that you can do, is if you haven't heard from someone in a while, then pointedly ask a direct question, or ask for some experience, or ask for some input, etc. from the person. So basically call them out in a nice, non-threatening way to participate with the team. How do people take turns? I was in a book club. Okay, maybe I'm going to go through all of them. I was at a book club recently in the last couple of years on campus about reading sustainable books and how we can apply them into the classroom. And one of the things that I really appreciated was that instead of just having people shout out and interrupt, which I tended to do, and then other people don't, that meant that there were a few people who were dominating the conversation and a few people who weren't participating at all. So what the facilitator did is they assigned a role to someone that they would record the names of whoever wanted to talk. So if you had something you wanted to say about what we were talking about, you would raise your hand. That person who was keeping track of who wanted to participate, who wanted to say something, had something to contribute, would write down the names, and then when that person was done, they would just follow down the list, so you could be sure that you weren't going to lose your place. So I thought that was a great way of keeping track, of taking turns instead of people just butting in. Like I said, like I tend to do, but it's not polite and not everyone appreciates. For the next 2 has to do with like the inner relationships of the team. So is everyone getting along? People are comfortable talking to everyone, everyone talking to everyone on an individual basis, and everyone responding to everyone, so that there's no, those 2 would be, and if people aren't, would be a way to identify that there may be some interpersonal issues that need to be dealt with within the team. How are interruptions handled? So I kind of just talked about that with how do people take turns. That's the same way that they did that. Another one I've heard but haven't participated in is whoever holds the pencil or holds whatever is the one who can speak next. And is silence okay? Or, and most of the time the answer to that is yes, to give people time to think, absorb, integrate the most recent conversation or thoughts into whatever the path is that you're on. Is anyone dominating the conversation? I've already covered. How are decisions made? So this is something, all of these things are things that you might want to consider putting in your team rules. That's part of your one of the criteria you need for your teamwork agreement. So how are decisions made? Is it by consensus? So the majority rules. Do you guys vote? Do you vote visually? Do you vote by secret ballot? Is one person going to be the leader and be the default, that they'll have veto power, etc.? So identifying that before you get to decisions that are difficult is often a good idea, because then you have how it's going to be handled worked out before emotions get involved with it. And again, I just want to highlight that as you're going through this, observe your own feelings, thoughts, etc. as well, not just those of your teammate and how you're contributing. So next, communication can go awry. So how can things go wrong? When the tone or words come across as an order or a command or warn or threaten, those kinds of things, that can be very demoralizing and put people off and cause them to disengage. And so oftentimes it's a matter of watching your tone. Oftentimes it's a matter of watching your tone. And so just be careful of that, is that it's a consensus environment that you're trying to get everyone to participate in. You don't want to be cross-examining like the person is, on the witness stand and cross-examining them on how they're completing their tasks, when they're completing it, etc. There's better ways to do that. I often tease and have a high level of sarcasm from in my family growing up, and so that could be taken very poorly, even though I mean to be funny or lighten things up. Given the situation or the other individual that's on the receiving end, it might not be received that way. So you just need to be careful about that. One of the most common ways that communications can go astray, I think, is if you avoid discussing an issue. And so when their difficulties arise, sometimes they're very difficult to bring up, hard to start a discussion on, but it's definitely a good idea to do that, to be sure that those issues get resolved and taken care of. Another one is the assume instead of listen. So it's very difficult sometimes. I find myself formulating my own opinion about what the situation is based on my assumptions and my experiences instead of listening to what everyone else has to contribute. And so I try to be very careful about that. And then different people have different communication styles. And a story I always like to tell is I was in a leadership workshop very early in my career, and there was this other gal that I worked with who I really respected and liked a lot. But we had very different communication styles. I forget what mine was called. Hers was called a driver. So I would, if I wanted you to move the desk from one corner of the room to the other, I would more than likely say, oh, it would be a good idea if that desk moved from the right corner to the left corner of the room. And given my communication style, to me, I'm telling you to move the desk from the right corner to the left corner of the room. But if you were a driver, as this other lady was, then that is an option. I'm not telling you to do something, I'm presenting it as an option. So her communication style would have been move the desk from the right to the left corner of the room. And so because of the way I presented it, it would be a good idea if the desk was over there. That was an option, and if she chose not to do it, then she wasn't disobeying or not doing what the team wanted or what I wanted. It was just an option, and she chose not to do it. And then if it was the tables were turned and she told me move the desk from the right to the left corner, I might see that as being as an order, command. I might see that as being very threatening and bossy and pushy when we're teammates, etc. And so again, we're both trying to get to the same thing, those different communication styles. So be aware of that. All right? Also could be differences in culture. When I was working with a plant down in Mexicali, the answer would almost always be yes to everything, because it was just their cultural style to say yes, and so we needed to delve a little further into it to be sure that yes really meant yes, or tomorrow really meant tomorrow, not sometime in the future. So be aware of communication styles with cultural differences. Now, we're not in class, so we're not going to do this little activity right here, list 5 ways to find a project for this class, brainstorm 5 ways, but that's something, if you haven't identified a project for your team already, that you might want to do. And then as you're doing that, observe the types of communication behaviors. Is everyone participating? Is anyone dominating the conversation? Are people ordering and commanding? Are communication styles different? Those kinds of things, both for your teammates and for yourself. Now, the activity I do want you to do is, this PowerPoint is posted on PolyLearn, is I want you to take this matrix and complete it for this project. It's a little early for that, but for some project you've been on in the past. So in this top quadrant here, for yourself, I want you to list what did you do that contributed to the success of your team, and be specific. List some examples of something you did. Some work, some task, whatever, related to the communications of the team, whatever. And then down here, nobody's perfect, so what did you yourself do that hindered the success of the team? So maybe you were late to meetings, maybe you didn't keep the meetings on track, maybe you were late turning in some of your assignments. So list some specifics here. And then over here, for whatever, and it could be a variety of teams that you want to pull examples from, or just one project that you worked on. But over here then for your teammates, what did they do that contributed to the success of the team? Did they do anything that went over and above? Maybe they went and visited the office hour of the teacher to get some additional instruction or clarification. Maybe they went and collected some extra data at the site, etc. But list some specifics of what your teammates did that contributed to the success of the team. And then down here, what are some things that some teammates did that hindered the success of the team? And so bring this completed matrix in to class on Thursday. Let me say that again. Bring it into class as stated on PolyLearn, and we'll have a short discussion about it in class. Okay, so we have covered part 1, the introduction to teamwork in the prior video, and now this is the conclusion of part 2, where we've talked about communication behaviors and how communication can go awry. And then again, be sure you complete this matrix and bring it into class as stated on PolyLearn. Thank you.